In the name of God, in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen. Amen. Seated. So today is the last Sunday of Epiphany. And on Wednesday, this Ash Wednesday, we will begin the sacred season of repentance and reflection known as Lent. This coming Tuesday evening, this Shrove Tuesday evening, we will celebrate Mardi Gras with a pancake supper from 5 to 7 p.m. in the parish hall. So please come, and please bring and invite your friends and relatives as well. So Shrove Tuesday, pancake supper, this Tuesday, anytime between 5 and 7 p.m. And Ash Wednesday, this Wednesday, with services at 12 noon and 7 p.m. And thus, we end the season of Epiphany and begin the season of Lent. The season of Epiphany stretches from the end of Christmas to the very beginning of Lent. Epiphany is a season of light. The light of the world, Jesus the Christ, the light of God, came into the world at Christmas. And we celebrate the light of Christ for a season of several weeks, culminating today. And so today's readings are also all about light. We have the Old Testament reading from the book of Exodus that tells us the story of Moses, who met and communed with God face to face on the wild, windswept slopes of Mount Sinai in ancient Egypt. And we're told that those encounters, which most of us can only just imagine, left Moses shining with the light of God, with the light of God's presence, to the point that Moses actually had to cover his face to keep from scaring people away. I guess Moses must have been quite a sight after those meetings with God. But this story reminds me that the ancient Israelites believed that you cannot see the face of God and live, though apparently Moses did. It reminds me that you cannot come face to face with God and not be changed in some radical and lasting way. It reminds me that my Jesuit professors always used to say, laughingly, but quite honestly, once you've been close to God, you are wrecked for life. Because nothing less than God can ever satisfy you again. It reminds me that I know from my own lived experience and from the lived experience of so many people I've known, including many of you. It reminds me that I know that once you see God, you can't unsee God. Which is pretty awesome and pretty cool. In the second reading from Corinthians, St. Paul refers back to this wonderful story from the Old Testament about Moses. And St. Paul uses it as allegory or metaphor to help his listeners understand how God reveals God's glory and presence in the world, including in their lives and in them. And then finally, the story of the Transfiguration from the Gospel of Luke also harkens back to Moses' encounter with God on Mount Sinai. But this time, the full revelation of God's light and glory and presence are to be found in Jesus the Christ, the Son of God. And as if to confirm that fact beyond the shadow of a doubt, Moses comes back for a repeat performance. Moses is once again present on the mountain. But this time, he brought some company. Moses and Elijah, representing the great Hebrew law and the prophets, stand by and bask in the light of the Son of God, who is now the central character in the revelation of what God was doing, is doing, and will do to bring to completion God's mission of love and mercy and compassion for all God has made. In this story, Jesus is shining with the light of God because Jesus is the light of God. Elsewhere in the Gospels, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And he also tells his followers that they are the light of the world, which means that we are the light of the world. God has a whole lot of light going on here, for sure. This story reminds me that the light of God shines everywhere, in everyone, all the time. Even when the darkness seems to be the darkest, and probably especially when the darkness seems to be the darkest. It reminds me that I've seen that light, glistening in tears and shining in laughter, in the eyes of the very old and the very young and everyone in between. It reminds me that I've seen the light of God shining everywhere in God's beautiful creation. Not just on God's beautiful creation, like when the sunlight dances on the water, or when the moonlight or the starlight twinkle through the trees. Not just shining on God's beautiful creation, but shining from within God's beautiful creation. All things shine from the inside out. If you meet their mystery, the mystery of their being, with humble silence and gentle reverence and contemplative stillness, they will show you their light. They will. This story reminds me that I've seen that light shining most brightly in the eyes of those who were just recently born, and in the eyes of those who are very close to death. In fact, sometimes as people approach death, they become almost transparent to the light, translucent. It's as if the light that has always been within them begins to shine right through what is left of their physicality. I've actually seen this a few times. And I know many others who have seen it as well, especially those who frequently work with folks who are dying, like hospice workers and medical workers in hospitals. It seems that the closer we get to God, the brighter we shine, the brighter we become, the more we become and radiate the light. I know this might sound crazy to those of you who haven't yet had an experience of this, but to those who have, well, you can't unsee it. You can't unsee God. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the point of the transfiguration. Maybe that's why Jesus allowed some of his closest friends and followers to experience, to actually see the light of God shining brightly through his physicality. Remember that this event, as retold by Matthew and Mark and Luke, and Peter in the second letter of Peter, this event, the Transfiguration, occurred immediately prior to the events that led to Jesus' suffering and death. Immediately prior. Maybe Jesus wanted his friends to see the light in him before they would be required to enter the darkness with him. Maybe he wanted them to be reassured that the light shines in the darkness and the darkness will never overcome it. Maybe he wanted them to see the light and the glory of God so that they wouldn't be able to unsee it when they needed it the most. Like when he would be arrested. Like when they would betray him and deny him and run away. Like when he would be subjected to a sham trial and very real torture. Like when he would be crucified. Like when he would die. Like when he would be buried in a tomb. Maybe Jesus wanted them to see the light and glory of God so that they wouldn't be able to unsee it until they got to see it again on Easter. On Easter. Because it's the same light. It's the same light that was the very first thing that God spoke into being at the dawn of creation, when God said, "Let there be light." And so there was. The first thing. It's the same light that led the people of ancient Israel through the desert as a pillar of light and cloud. The same light that crashed into lightning around the top of Mount Sinai. The same light that Moses reflected after his face-to-face encounters with God and then had to cover over with a veil. It's the same light that allowed St. Paul to see the unspeakable beauty and the mystery of the cosmic Christ in the light of all creation and as the light of all creation. It's the same light that was shining through Jesus at the Transfiguration. The same light that was shining as Jesus at the Transfiguration. It's the same light that shines on and in and through everyone and everything that God has loved into existence. It's the same light that shines through the eyes of newborn children and shines through the eyes and even sometimes the bodies of those who are drawing near to God in death. It's the same light, and it's unspeakably beautiful and unfathomably awesome and utterly unforgettable. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's everywhere, because God is everywhere. And you can't put a veil over that.